So we're going to move on with our first panel, which is secular 12 steps. How to work the steps in a secular fashion. And our panelists are Maureen B., Scott S., and Eileen C. So please, Tim is going to moderate the And since there's this really large clock in the middle of the wall up there, nobody has an excuse for running over time. I will give you signals when everything is close.
You haven't seen anything yet. Hello, fellow AA members. How are you? Hey. My name's Jim. I'm an alcoholic. And so this is kind of the secular step workshop. And I have the marvelous Maureen over here. Scotty too hottie. Do I need a microphone?
Yeah. We're recording this, so yes.
Okay, so we're just going to talk about some aspects of working the steps, secular. And the first question is, why talk about this? What, Maureen, why don't you know?
Okay, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Maureen, I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Maureen.
So why talk about this? Why does anybody work the 12 steps? Not just agnostic people, but why work the 12 steps in general? And the answer from my point of view is because I want to change. The me that I was when I walked in the doors drank, and I don't want to drink anymore. And I was able to stop during the time that I was drinking for sometimes a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks, but I couldn't stay stopped. So I believe that something inside me had to shift or change in order to permanently stay away from drinking. And for me, that was using the 12 steps. And then why we want to talk about it today is because there's issues that many of us, especially in this room, have with the 12 steps. I can't tell you how many agnostic AA meetings I've been to where people share that they've tried, this isn't their first time coming to AA, and they, I went and the steps were on the wall and the word God was there over and over and over, and I just couldn't handle it and I left. And so I think it's important to talk about that and how it may put people off and how there is in fact another way. It doesn't mean you don't have to work the steps at all or you don't have to come to AA at all. So from my point of view, that's why we're talking about today.
Scott?
All right, I'm Scott, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Scott.
Good morning. I type stuff out in case I freeze in angst. So I'll read some and I'll share some. I've been hearing this theme coming up more than a few times in this meeting that I started for LGBTQRST, whatever. I keep hoping that the straight people will take one of the letters, just so we don't have to take all of them. We'll manage if we have to, but pretty soon you're going to come to us. Because you'll be the odd ones. So there's this common theme that I keep hearing coming up with some of the newcomers, not all of them, is this kind of disdain and quite a bit of mistrust for anything traditional in AA. And, obviously, I've been around AA for three decades, and I worked the steps the way they were written, and I grew up Catholic, so I went along with the party line. I was not agnostic or atheist in the beginning. I just had a lot of questions deep down that I didn't want to come to the surface for fear that you might ostracize me. Also, I wasn't ready to face them myself, to be honest. I did the steps as they were written, and I'll be honest with you, it was the biggest awakening that I had in an introspective way to that point in my life. It was a huge awakening. I didn't know that I was part of the problem because my family taught me to point the finger at you, and I thought that worked, but it turned out it just pisses people off and makes me upset. So it wasn't working. But the introspective portions of the steps for me were a big boon. I really got a lot out of it. So why talk about the steps? There's a lot of good there, and that's that.
Thank you. Now, we're kind of shooting from the hip here. We were going to have 3 panelists, so are we agreed we're going to ask someone from the audience to ask, to actually fill in. So if you want to raise a hand, and if I pick you, do they have to come up here and talk into the mic?
That would be ideal.
Your dream has come true, Joe. My name's John. I'm an alcoholic. I'm visiting from Washington, D.C., so I'm an interloper, and I shouldn't be sitting up here at all. But this topic is so central to some of the things and issues I think we have in secular AA that I decided that I would stick my neck out. And if you want to send me back to exile, my plane leaves at 7:20 tomorrow morning. I'll be out of here, so you don't have to worry about me. My sobriety date is January 3rd, 1987. So I've been around. I came up in sobriety in a very liberal environment in Northwest Washington, D.C. Did not have to put up with a lot of things that a lot of you had to put up with. I was also very fortunate that 2 hardcore atheists started a AA meeting for us in September of 1988 with the Agnostics DC. We'll have our 30th anniversary as a meeting this coming September. So I haven't had a lot of the trouble with acceptance and guilt. And I've been free to say all my AA life that I am a militant atheist. I have an agenda. I have a militant atheist agenda. How's that? Okay, like that. Okay, that's what I am. That's who I am. I believe the 12 steps, even though I will say I'm schizophrenic on the subject, because step 1, and Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob's genius of meeting with each other over that crummy kitchen table in Akron and discovering the power of sharing really did save my life. There would have been no other way for me to enter unless I made a decision about my alcoholism. And step 1 certainly did help with that. But other than that, I truly believe, as a militant atheist, that the 12 steps are primarily centered on the following. They are the product of the Oxford group and the 4 absolutes of the Oxford group. What they want you to do is to believe in confession, contrition, and abasement, self-abasement. And that's the way I view the 12 steps. I do not practice the 12 steps. I've been sober a long time. Now, that said, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot in AA, and we'll shut up now because I've just been told to. I would say fuck you. I won't do that. I'll tell John Cameron to go. That's next time. Somebody will understand.
I'm going to pipe in on this one. I'm a Tim. I'm a discovering alcoholic. And why talk about this? Because people's lives are at stake. That's the only time I'm going to make a comment. Thank you. Question number 2. Well, let's Scott go first. And we have a handheld mic now for the audience share part, so I don't have to wrestle for my seat again. If there's no cure, why bother?
All right, so steps don't cure alcoholism. I oftentimes wished they would, and some people make it sound like they do. For me, in my experience, the ongoing cycle of alcoholism or substance use disorder needed a break from the chemicals. And once that stopped, there were a lot of thoughts, beliefs, and the resulting emotions and actions that kind of could use a lot of change. You know, in order for me to feel like sobriety was worth having, I needed to figure out a way to make life worth living. And I grew up in an alcoholic family, and that was just a difficult thing. I didn't know there were ways to change how you think and how you act, other than manipulation, control, guilt, and shame. And so I was really grateful to find that there was a system that was helpful. It helped me a lot fast.
So, yeah, I don't believe that the steps cure alcoholism either, but I do believe that they provide temporary relief from it in a way that me, myself, can't, or just not drinking can't. I think it's in the 10th step promises where it talks about at this point in the process we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. And what that means for me is that most days I don't think about drinking. It doesn't haunt me. It doesn't come up me or anything like that. And I believe it's a direct result of the step work that I do. I think that the result of working the steps keeps me away from a drink, but like I said, it's temporary. So you have that change or that shift. But I think if you do it once and stop, you can easily change back. I have. My experience is that I did it, and then I had great success and a time of peace, and I stopped working the steps, and I stopped maintenance, all of it, and I ultimately relapsed. So it's not a one and done lifetime cure, but if done regularly and practiced as part of my ongoing program, it definitely helps keep me away from a drink. And another reason for why bothering is that there's a level of peace and contentment that I have in my life on a regular basis that comes from a direct result of that introspection and that work that I've done. Just me without alcohol is pretty raw and pretty unstable. It's that restless, irritable, and discontented. And I wouldn't want to feel like I did 10 days sober without doing any work for the rest of my life. Like, that's miserable. So if I'm not gonna have alcohol or drugs in my life, then I want something else that gives me that level of peace and serenity. And for me, it's been the step work.
Thank you. Okay, audience time. The question, if there is no cure, why bother? Does someone have an opinion on that out there? All right, wait for our handheld mic, please. Where is it?
I was in the restroom.
Yeah,
Yeah, so when I was a year sober back in '95, I was leaving Sedona going to Atlanta, and I was traveling with a gal who had 13 years in the program who wouldn't let me leave El Paso, Texas, or wouldn't let me leave where I was dropping her off in San Antonio until I completed the 4th step. Right? Because I was going to go to Atlanta and be with her best friend, who we'd broken up and got back together again. And so for the next 8 hours, I'm sitting there writing on a piece of paper while she drives my truck, which is hauling a Porsche which she gave me for my 1-year anniversary, right? Which was her 1-year anniversary 13 years prior. So I'm willing to go along for the ride. And in that time, the 8 hours to San Antonio, a memory came back of me at 8 years old, sitting on the curb in front of our house in Forest Park, Ohio, crying my eyes out because my mom was leaving my violent alcoholic father. And I cried and I begged her to stay. Now, she had 7 kids in the house, and he had a good job at Ford Motors, so for whatever reason a woman would decide to stay in that environment, she made that choice and stayed. But they didn't tell the 8-year-old boy why. And so every time my dad came home at 2 o'clock in the morning to beat up my mom, I had to get up and defend her, and I'd get the crap beat out of me. And to the extent where at 11 years old, I started taking LSD. But having remembered that moment, I can go, Well, she didn't stick around because I cried and begged her. She just forgot to tell me why she did. And she stayed so she could have food on the table for those kids that were home. And so I'm grateful to the 12 steps because they were able to give me that moment of clarity, which was, I believe, the causal effects of my stinking thinking that led me to suppress my emotions, suppress my experiences, to change my reality. I survived 3,000 acid trips after that. Right? When I tripped with Timothy Leary, he was impressed. So, for me, that moment freed me from needing to suppress anything. I've never had a desire to pick up again. I've been clean and sober that entire time, and I'm grateful to the steps for allowing me to do that.
Okay, thanks. All right, question number 3. What does working the steps look like from your perspective? Maureen, you want to handle that?
Sure, I'll start. The way that I like to work the steps is to review the traditional approach first and then modify it as necessary. And I do that both myself and with people I work with. There's a quote from one of my favorite authors, and I'm going to paraphrase it and butcher it a little bit. But the gist of it is, he says, read the books are important, learn the rules are important, then forget the books and the rules and live in the questions. And then the result of that is generosity, joy, balance in life, all of those things. And I think it's really important to remember for AA history, for unity, for when we do go into traditional meetings or whatever, it's important to remember where we come from and the thread that runs through AA. Also, the steps, all the modifications we have of the steps, it's just variations on the same psychological principles. So it's good to pay attention to what they are and know where we're starting. So I stick closely to the difficulty of 12 and 12 as a starting point, and then when it rubs me or whoever I'm working with the wrong way, we look at a variety of different source materials and kind of go together based on that. An example I can think of is step 2, which traditionally says we came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that can restore us to sanity. So I have a couple of issues with that step. And what I like instead is, if we can't do it alone and we've come to accept that we need power beyond our own awareness. And so it doesn't mean that I'm powerless and I'm not doing it, but I need power or help in addition to what I'm doing. And I find that works for me and for most of the people that I work with. And there's little things like that throughout each of the steps. So that's kind of how I go about it.
What does working the steps look like from your perspective?
I went through the steps, and I've never gone through them in that order again. But I kind of have changed and evolved over time. Even now, my thoughts about the steps are changing as I'm listening to this group, and I've been able to separate them as tools, and the ones that work, I kind of use them, and the ones that don't, I kind of ignore, and that all changes over time. It made me think about, I'm a sculptor as well as a nurse, and I took this ceramic class and heard this story about this teacher that at the beginning of the semester he would tell half the students, make the perfect teapot by the end of the semester, and he would tell the other half of the students, I'm going to have a scale at the end of the semester and I want to weigh 100 pounds of finished work, and if it's 90 pounds you get a B, and if it's 80 you get a C, and so forth, And so it turns out at the end of the semester, the people that did 100 pounds of clay, fire clay, actually could make a much better teapot that could withstand the rigors of the kiln, and really sound designs that worked. And the people that were making the really perfect teapots fell apart and weren't too good, but they both got A's. I think of the steps kind of like that. I mean, they're like tools, when I use them a lot, the ones that are worthwhile. I mean, I think of them more as principles tools that point toward principles or maybe virtues, and so I use them that way, and that's kind of how I work.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, audience, preferably from someone who has kind of worked the 12 steps in a secular way. What does working the steps look like from your perspective? Volunteer, please. Come on, somebody show me. Don't forget to introduce yourself.
That's a joke I wanted to say in the meeting. I'm always forgetting to say that, hi, I'm John, and I am definitely an alcoholic. I'll tell. And my view of the steps is very similar to Joe's, now that he's been up and described it. When I first went to a meeting, I looked at the wall, I listened to what they were saying, and the first thing that struck me was that first step, that I was powerless over alcohol, and my life was an absolute mess. It really was. I mean, I was working, didn't have any accidents or anything else, but my mind was really in bad shape, and I wasn't enjoying myself. I had contemplated anything that would help relief. And drinking is that temporary form of that relief that I was seeking. And from there I went, I got a sponsor, got a traditional sponsor, and he was very God-fearing, and would back me in a corner and shake his finger at me, and I would say, okay, all right, okay. And I did maybe 2 steps with him after a fashion, and I just tried to fit in. I didn't want to be ostracized. I'd been ostracized enough. I didn't want that anymore. I was trying to belong for the first time. I tried to belong someplace. I liked these people. I liked you. I liked what you had to say. And I didn't want to be thrown out. So I went along with the program. Then I got another sponsor. And he was, even though he was a deacon in whatever church he was very understanding. And he said, well, I'm not going to push the God stuff, but you still got to go through the steps. So we worked the steps in a secular manner. It was sort of taking a philosophical look at the steps. What did they really mean? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to do? What do I want to get from this? And where do I want to go with it? It helped me to be, for the first time, introspective. Instead of thinking I had all the answers, I realized I had lots of questions and no answers. So in a way it was good because I started asking the questions. Now I've been in AA for a few years, and I was always going to regular meetings. Admittedly, I missed a lot of meetings. There were months would go by I wouldn't go to a meeting, and it wasn't easy, but I just couldn't stand going there and getting somebody's finger pointed in my face. Nevertheless, I did stay sober. And I moved up to Arizona and was going to a regular meeting, and I happened to notice the thing on the board. My time's up. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry if I have to cut through the show, but we're supposed to be about 2 to 3 minutes, so try and keep it concise, and I'm very flexible. Okay, question number 4. What do you say to a newcomer who expresses disinterest in working the steps? Scott?
All right. Well, like all alcoholics, I don't appreciate unsolicited advice, much less manipulation, control, shame, blah, blah, blah. When I believe a newcomer is wrong about the steps, that's more about my control issues than about where they're at the moment. You know, what I strive to do at my best is create space and attention for others, you know, and especially people in recovery. And that's far more healing than me trying to sell something or push something. If they honestly want some advice, you know, I'm glad to share my experience. I try to keep it to my experience rather than what you should be doing, you know, so I'll pass.
Thanks, Scott.
So I feel exactly the opposite. No. I love shame. You're wrong. No, actually, I have. I said something in a meeting a couple of years ago, and I really liked it, so I say it a lot now. And I don't like to repeat myself generally, but I make an exception for this because it's a good metaphor, I think. I was attending, it was actually a traditional AA group for a while when I first got sober this time. And there was a friend of mine in the group, he had, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or 2 years on me. And shortly after one of his anniversaries, he shared with the group that he had only been going to that meeting, and it meant 2 days a week since he got sober, and he had never had a sponsor or worked the steps. And he posed the question, do you think it's worth it? Should I do that? You know, and that was the topic of that day. And so we all went around and talked about it. And when it got to me, what I said was, you know, is it possible to get sober and stay sober without the 12 steps? Absolutely. Like, you know, I've seen people in and out of the rooms who do it all the time. Is it something that I personally want? No. And here's why. To me, it's kind of like going to Disneyland and not going on any of the rides or seeing any of the exhibits. You can go and you can have a good time and you can, you know, eat some food and it's great, but you're missing out on so much of the experience if you don't do the whole deal. It's a matter of having your life get a little bit better or having your life be extraordinary. And why not go for extraordinary?
All right, audience time. What do you say to a newcomer who expresses disinterest in working the steps? Volunteer, please. There you go.
Hi, I'm Michael, very Black Hawk. And I kind of take off from what happened when I first got to AA 28 years ago, and I had a sponsor, and you know, he was taking these other people out to lunch, and I'd see him, you know, kind of huddling up and, you know, doing the press with some people sometimes, and after like a couple of months of that, I felt really bad and bored. I said, well, how come you don't do that with me? What's going on? He says, oh, I'm sorry, that's kind of embarrassing. You want to be sober, you want to be here. I don't worry about you. You're gonna come to me or whoever when you're ready and you want to know something. And you'll work the steps when you want to work the steps. My job is to be available. And it just impressed on me, and it affected my sponsorship, is that it's about somebody who wants it, and it's not about anything I'm here to proselytize about. So I'm on the kind of far side of attraction rather than promotion, you know, the point where I've been accused of you know, not carrying the message. You know, if you really do this, the way I read the book, you are the message by showing up and having whatever it is you have. And those who need that will have that. So I have to say, okay, you know, find what you want. If you find what you want here, go after it.
You gotta write that down. You are the message. All right. We are halfway through our question and answer thing here, and I brought my gong. I'm gonna bang it. All right, question number 5. Do the steps have value as written, and do you take issue with certain steps?
The answer, do the steps have value as written? Absolutely. There are some of the steps that I still work as written with no changes. Step 4 is a good example. I do it right out of the book. It's worked really well for me every time I've done it. And it's a great tool when working with others, and it's good for that that introspection, and it's also good for connecting with the other person because it's a pretty involved process, and so there's lots to talk about and lots of opportunity to really get to know somebody on a level that you wouldn't otherwise do. Step 12 is another one that I like just is written, even though it says having had a spiritual experience or awakening as a result of these steps. I don't necessarily equate spiritual awakening with God or even a defined deity. A spiritual awakening can be an emotional shift or, a worldview shift or, it's for me, it's more about things like love and compassion and stuff like that. So some of the steps I don't touch at all, really. And then the second question was, do you take issue with certain steps? Yeah. There's several that really bother me. The two that I made note of are 3 and 6. So 3 is where we're supposed to turn our will and our life over to God. And that really that's always been really hard for me. I worked the steps traditionally the first time that I got sober, and with sincerity. I had that gift of desperation that people talk about, and so I did. Once I got on my knees with a sponsor and had to say it with her, and that prayer, and it was just so awkward, but I fumbled my way through it. And another time I was sent down to sit in front of sort of this lake and say it by myself, just me and God, and I was told to sit there until I had the spiritual experience of after the prayer. So I sat there, and I sat there, and I remember after a bit thinking, well, okay, that's probably long enough. It was so uncomfortable, and I hate that step as it's written. So that's one I changed drastically for myself and for others. And then the other one that really just pisses me off is 6, because I hate 6 and 7. I hate the term defects of character. I personally don't believe that we are defective in any way, and I don't like the idea of eliminating any part of my personality. I won't go on about this forever, but anger, rage, jealousy, fear, all of those things are good at the right time and in the right place. If I'm in a dark alley at midnight and I'm not afraid, I'm stupid. So it's a matter of balancing what's in you and learning appropriateness of size and scope and having the right reaction to the right situation, and that comes from the rest of the step work, I believe. So that's what I have on that.
My mom's been trying to get me to go to church for over half a century. It was easier in the beginning. She also wanted me to be a priest to cover up for family shame for me being gay. And I went to the Monsignor, and he told me not to masturbate for 6 months. So I joined this group. That church is a good fit for my mom's beliefs and her values, and it works for her. Steps written as they were in the 30s, 40s are a good fit for a lot of people, and they work for a lot of people, and I don't want to tell them not to do it. If something's keeping you sober, keep doing it and tell me what you're doing. So I'm grateful that I have lived to see a lot of new groups come up, for different habitual patterns. I also go to Al-Anon, and all of them have taken the steps and altered them in their own ways, so it turns out you can rewrite them. And so I'm grateful for that. If I could get rid of some of the steps, would I? Probably 6 and 7. I mean, it leans a little bit to magic. For me, these are, my dogs get jealous. If they can get jealous, and I'm also a mammal, I apparently get jealous and no magic can take it away. Because I've tried to get my dogs not to be jealous and it doesn't work too. So, at best, I can note my behavior and maybe at least apologize for it and not obsess about it. So, That's it.
Okay, question number 5, audience time. Do the steps have value as written, and do you take issue with certain steps? Volunteers. Please. Okay, we got 2F. One's really quick. You can go on to another one.
I'll be brief.
Okay.
My name is Julia. I'm an alcoholic.
Hello?
Well, I think I can talk loud enough. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I can relate to some of the other shares where I came in and I just kind of wanted to like go with the flow and just did what people told me, and that's what I've done in the beginning. And quite honestly, I've been sober for about 8 years, and I did the steps once within my first like 60 or 90 days. Haven't ever done them completely again because I take strong like challenges with like quite a bit of the language, and so I've been able to derive. There's value there. I don't question the value there, and I can find that value in a lot of other ways. And so honestly, I haven't spent a lot of time working the steps because I can find those same principles in other places. So that's it. Thanks.
We have time to.
Yeah, go for it.
Lisa, alcoholic. I think that the steps both ways have significant just roles in my life. I went through rehab and I was done with step 1 before the end of the week. After 90 days, I had gone through all 5 steps, and I was really proud of myself. And then I got a sponsor, and she said, "We're starting all over." Oh my gosh. It took me almost 2 months to do my first step. We went through every aspect of my life. It's like, yeah, I'm fucked up. And that's as quick as it was in rehab. That's all I had to decide. But when I had to write down and think, how much money was I spending per week on alcohol? How many times did I completely humiliate myself in front of my children? How many ways my life is really, really fucked up? So I apologize, sorry. But I think that when we have so many books that can show us different ways to do the steps, to omit that part that bothers us so much, which bothers me, being agnostic. I am thrilled that we have so many different avenues to go. But if we do take it out, I've been sober for 10 months now, and I am barely through part of step 4. And it has absolutely changed my life, every single step that I've taken. So I highly recommend steps.
All right, we're on to question 6. Have you sponsored anyone who had alternative steps, and what was your experience?
I'll pick it up. I have sponsored a lot of people over the years. I've never gotten any of them to go all the way through the 12 steps, to be honest. I've also recently been sponsoring a guy using the alternate steps because he's in with us, and he's no more willing to do the 4th step than most of the other ones that I sponsor. I will say that he, like many others, had other forms of therapy and other forms of self-reflection and introspection. And he's still sober. He's sober in the meetings. He's happier than he was going to traditional AA meetings where he just felt they were intolerable to him. And so that's my experience.
Thanks, Scott.
Yes, I have sponsored people using alternative 12 steps, and the experience was amazing. I sponsored people the traditional way as well, and I think I personally get more out of the non-traditional way, although I'm not against sponsoring somebody who wants to do it the traditional way or who believes in God. That's fine too. But it's a little more fun for me to do it the non-traditional way because I like looking at things from different points of view and exploring alternate ways. There was one time I was working with a friend, and we were on step 7, which is the magic, the one where we ask God for numeric defects, and neither one of us like that at all. So it was the first time that I have a book about doing the steps from a Buddhist perspective, and I hadn't read it yet. And so it's against my grain normally to start in the middle of a book, like I like to go from the beginning to the end. But I was desperate, so I grabbed that book off the shelf and we looked at step 7 together, and it was just fucking amazing. And I went from hating that step to now it's one of my favorite steps. And so I think it's really cool to work with people who want to do it from an alternate point of view. And in the end, that end result, the psychic change or the personality shift or whatever it is that's supposed to happen that keeps us away from a drink, my observation has been that the end result's the same. And so how you get there doesn't really matter. And it's fun finding different ways.
Maureen, audience time. The question again is, have you sponsored anyone using alternative steps, and what was your experience? Please raise your hands. Thank you.
I'm John. I'm an average alcoholic. I think that every time that I work with somebody, it's an alternative way to do it. Because everybody's different. And I think one of the things I've learned in the early days of my sobriety, I was sober in 1981, and I was pretty much a step Nazi, and the program is the first 164 pages and an appendix, and it's nice to have a fellowship and blah blah blah. I don't feel that way anymore, but I have a guy who's 38 years sober or 39 years, I don't remember, and he wanted to do it the traditional way with me to work on a particular issue, and that was fine, except that I can only give what I have. And what I really have, basically, is meditation and introspection and learning that road, and so that's what I gave him. And every time I tried to suggest to him to do some writing, it didn't work. And he's 38 years sober, and I had another guy who came. Most of the people I sponsor are sober for decades, so I don't know from newcomers anymore too much, but one of the guys came to me and asked me if I'd help him work through the steps, and I said, well, when I'm working with somebody who's sober a long time, it's different. I never heard from him again. Because what he wanted to do was go back to the old way of doing everything and rehash everything he'd already done. And that's fine. For me, I have to, in my own internal process, I don't see the steps as something I work. At this point, it feels to me like it's just describing a process of life that I walk through. And for me, I don't surrender to it. I had somebody tell me, well, what do you surrender to if you don't believe in God? I said, why do you have to surrender to something? Why don't you just surrender? And I'm very sensitive to the sort of Catholicism in the 12 and 12. But my home group's a step study. So I guess I don't know if this is much of an answer for this question, except that it just does seem to me that every time that I work with somebody, it's an alternative way of doing it, because I don't have the rigid rules that I used to have anymore. I listen to them and try and understand where they're coming from and help them to find their own way.
All right.
Supposed to turn the light off.
All right, we have 2 more questions, 10 more minutes. Question 7. There are so many alternative versions of the steps out there. Do you think this weakens them?
No. No, provided that, it was ties into what I was saying earlier about making sure that I stick close to the original steps and am clear on the psychological principles behind them, then no, it doesn't matter how many variations there are, or how many languages, how many mindsets you translate it into. It should all work the same.
Well, Bill and Bob and the early group didn't have the steps. And even when they started to evolve, it wasn't 12. It kind of became 12 as a magic number, I think, with some filler. Anytime I hear people, and I hear it a little more than I wish I did, try to sanctify the 12 steps, as these tablets written on our walls. It leans toward fundamentalism, which really betrays the ongoing evolution and adaptability of our recovery movement. So I think I just don't see weakness in that. I just see weakness in leaning toward fundamentalism.
Scott. Okay, question 7. Volunteers from the audience, please. There are so many alternative versions of the steps out there. Do you think this weakens them? I know you got opinions out there. Microphone go. Hold on, Randy. We'll have a quick calm moment. Of course you.
Hello, I'm Randy. I attended the Mago retreat with Joe a couple of months ago in Sedona, and one of the exercises was to divide into groups of 3 or 4 and rewrite the first exercise, rewrite the first 3 steps without using any of the original words, but without looking at any of the original meaning, content, and it was really interesting what we came up with. Several people have mentioned that, just kind of feel out the person that you're sponsoring and see where they are and where they're trying to go. I didn't know that I was selfish and self-centered. I didn't know about all these character flaws that I had. But I was sober 7 years and dry 7 years before I went the steps at all. I just watched people, see what they were doing, and see if they were as hypocritical behind the scenes as in drinking as the badges I grew up with were not doing what they said they were doing. And by God, they were staying sober, and I was watching them to see how they were doing it. I thought 3 years ago when I first came to Concord that I was going to have to leave AA at 25 years sober. And I just couldn't take the God stuff anymore, and I didn't know about this. It was right shortly after the 7 months of conference. So it's been a new lease on life for me, finding out that there is free thinking AA thinking.
Thank you.
I'll make it quick.
Okay, and after our last question, we have time to go back, okay?
Stephanie, alcoholic. It's better over here. I think Bill, in some ways, encouraged it. We were even talking about prayer. When it talks about the 3rd step prayer, it says the wording was, of course, quite optional so long as we express the idea of voicing it without reservation. And I think he believed that about all the steps, because that's where the Al-Anon steps came from. So he saw that this program could work in many different areas, and it continues to in other fellowships. There are other fellowships that are exploding as a result of basing their program on the 12 steps.
Thank you. We're going to go on to question 8, and we can come back to this because there were a couple of people that want to share. Question 8, how do you feel about other systems of self-reflection? God.
So I've spent many valuable years in different forms of therapy. Thanks to the internet, I now have podcasts where I can listen to other people of like mind in recovery. I practice secular Buddhism. I don't tell my mom that. There's just so many ways out there that enhance my life and give it meaning. And because I just don't think there's inherent meaning in living, but I can imbue it with it if I choose, you know. And so that makes life a lot more worth living and makes picking up a lot less desirable. So do I believe in alternate forms of recovery? You know, I really hope that a better way of getting clean comes, you know, a way better than AA. If there is, I can't wait for it. I'm not bashing what exists. I'm just using what I know to do now. You know? So that's it.
Maureen, other forms of self-reflection.
I am all for any form of self-reflection, really, and it's whatever shoe fits you kind of thing. Personally, I enjoy the steps and the step work, but it only goes so far, and so I do other things in my life as well. I'm a fan of insight meditation. I practice mindfulness. I've seen a therapist from time to time. There's all different kinds of things. I like to read all different kinds of books. Conversation with like-minded friends in the program. I learn a lot from things like that, and that triggers self-reflection. So those are just some of the things that are appealing to me, and I know other things are appealing to other people. If it helps you get better, why not? That's what
Thanks, Maureen. Reflect yourself. Audience, do we have it? How do you feel about other forms of self-reflection? Volunteers.
Polyalcoholic. So other forms of self-reflection saved my life at 9.5 years sober, you know. It turns out I have outside issues as well that I used the steps to treat when I was first getting sober the first time I went through the steps. And like that 4-step told me that I was totally fucked and I had a part in every single thing that ever happened to me. And with childhood trauma, that's not necessarily true. Like,
Right.
And it, you know, 9.5 years sober, I'm suicidal and I'm in IOP and learning that I don't have to carry that around anymore. And, you know, and it took, I did all, like, year 10 has been all the therapy all the time. Like, give me all the therapy because I didn't deal with any of that stuff before. And without that therapy, I don't know if I'd be alive, you know? Like, it's been absolutely essential to look at other ways of looking at things. And because the 12 steps are not going to cure my bipolar disorder, and the 12 steps are not going to cure my childhood trauma or my adult trauma for that matter, whatever trauma. Like, I have to look outside of that in order to get the full picture. You know, it's essential.
Off right there and there. We got time. 2 more. They're kind of quick. Go ahead. Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine, recovered alcoholic. After about 15 years doing my best to work AA in the traditional fashion, I found that I was still seeking more, and I became a what I like to call a card-carrying Buddhist. I actually have a number and everything. But what we talk about in Buddhism is our own personal revolution. You know, that we're always looking at ourselves, and it was just another way of continuing my journey. And I think that each one of us, it's a personal journey. Our revolution is personal. It was before we got here, and it continues to be after we come into the rooms of AA. And I try to address that with everybody that I work with.
Thank you. Could you tell us that the lady right behind you there?
Hi, I'm Kat Little Creek. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a very physical person, and I always have been. And it was important for me, not only physically but spiritually as well, to come upon a way for me to do the steps physically, to reflect physically, you know, like that. And I'm Indian, and it took a ceremony coming into my life and me being able to participate in that ceremony once a year to be able to fulfill what I needed, you know. Anyone any way that you can do it, by God, do it. That's what I got. Thanks.
All right, this works perfectly. We're in closing time. I want to thank Maureen. I want to thank Scott, Tim, Joel, our